Hello, Spark fans. Welcome back to Advancing Spark, brought to you by Advancing Analytics, your friendly neighborhood data engineering and AI consultancy. Why are we here? Well, I want to look at Databricks Apps. Now, we heard of these things a year or so ago, announced at the Data AI Summit under the form of Lakehouse Apps. They're now called Databricks Apps, and they're out in preview, and you can go and have a play. But what is it, you ask? Well, there's a bunch of reasons why we've been spinning up UIs for people. Like, if you've built a RAG framework, so you're trying to do document summarization, and you want your users to be able to interact with it, well, they're not going to write some code in a notebook to do that. They want to have some kind of UI where you can ask their questions. You're trying to build a chatbot. You're trying to do anything that involves user interaction. Well, you need some kind of interface. And that's never really been inside of Databricks. So you've got AI BI dashboards. So if you're trying to do some fairly simplistic, very SQL-driven dashboards, you can do that there. But what if you need to do something more complicated? What if you need to have some Python interactions? What if they pick a choice and then that actually spins out to different things that are going to happen? You don't have that level of interactivity inside of the dashboards. So you need another tool. So what? You spin up a Docker container and install Flask in there and put in a little API. Maybe you go somewhere else and you host some Streamlit in a public website owned by another third party and then have to figure out all the integration stuff. There's just pain wherever you go. And that's what Databricks apps are trying to fix. They're trying to say, well, actually, you can get a little app. You can run it and host it inside of Databricks. All of the authentication and stuff is just taken care of. And so you just click a button and then suddenly you have an app and you have a little UI. Makes a lot of sense. And that's what we're going to have a look at how that works today. As always, if you're new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah, let us know what you want to use a UI for. What are the use cases you're looking at this going, whoa, I've been trying to do X, Y, Z. Let us know, because I'm super interested how people are actually going to use it. Right, let's go have a look. So, here we go. The announcement for Databricks Apps talks about a bunch of stuff. One, it's in preview, it's in AWS and Azure, usual stuff. A load of use cases, data viz. Sure, depends how complex a dashboard you're trying to make, otherwise you can just use a dashboard. AI applications, absolutely. Anytime you've got a model and you want people to interact with said model, a little UI is going to make a huge amount of sense. More complex self-serve analytics, yeah. DQ monitoring, ETL monitoring, all those things where if you've got a lot of data inside of Databricks, data about your data, really, really good use cases, just surface that out. We're having a look at a use case of making a little UI to surface the lineage and data quality information just in a slightly more roundabout way for data governance folks. Just loads of things you can do. So the main important thing is which frameworks can I use. So you should be familiar with one or two of these Python frameworks for just building a UI for you. Dash, Shiny, Gradio, Streamlit, and Flask are probably the most common ones we hear about. Certainly within Advanced Analytics, if we're trying to demonstrate how an AI app would work, we built a whole AI toolbox out of Streamlit. And we use that to show clients how it's going to work. What do you mean a RAG application? How does that work? Well, have a look at this little UI, drag your PDF into there, type your question you want to ask about it. Look, you can ask questions on your PDF. Isn't that great? Doesn't that make sense? That's what we use these really lightweight little Python UIs for. And it just makes sense for that stuff. So that is what Databricks apps are. Bunch of things about it, lots of information on how it works. There's some demos. We'll just build a quick demo of it in a second, so we'll go through that. Deployment's actually fairly slick, I'm happy to say. Kind of all makes sense. Governance is baked in. You've got Unity Cat backing. You've got all that kind of stuff, so we can see what that looks like. Yeah, just lots of stuff in there. And there's a lot of docs now, so you can go and have a look about how they actually work. So I'll drop the link to this down in the description below. But the most important thing, let's go and have a look. So let's just go back a step. So inside of Databricks, if I'm trying to get actually to my apps, they live inside compute. So they're a type of bit of compute that you spin up. So I can go new over here and try and do a new app from here. That makes sense. But if you're trying to look at an existing app, you're trying to look at what all the different apps you're hosting, you'll go to compute. And if you're in one of the workspaces that has apps enabled, you'll see this apps tab. Now, it's not available in absolutely every region yet. So I'm in West Europe here. It's not in North Europe. It's not in UK South. It depends if you have, essentially, if you have interactive serverless enabled in the region where you have Databricks. In this case, I'm using West Europe because it does, and then we can go and have a play. So you can see I've got one app that's currently active. If the compute is active, I'm paying for it. And we'll talk about cost in a minute. But let's just do a really, really quick example. I'm going to start it going, and then we can talk about how it works whilst it's working. So I've said I want to create a new app. I can just do custom, saying, just give me a blank container, and I'll write some code, and you'll run it. Or I can say, actually, can you just like get like the bare bones stuff actually in and deployed with a bit of an example, and then I'll go and edit it from there. So for that, I'm going to jump on Streamlit. I'm going to do a data app. Now, this is the most basic thing in the world. It's going to run a SQL query against the serverless SQL warehouse. So it's going to use Spark to go and do the compute and actually work out what it's doing, and then give it back to this app. And I'm going to have a couple of parameters and a visualization, and it's basically a dashboard. But to show you how it works under the hood, this kind of makes sense. I'm going to say next. Go ahead and create my app. This is going to be my little data app. That's about it. I can give it a description, so if people look at it, they know what it actually is. And my advanced settings, I need to say, well, it's a data app, so it's going to need some kind of warehouse. Go and use my serverless warehouse. So I've got a serverless warehouse. It's currently turned off. When I start using it, it'll turn that server on. And it needs permissions to use it. So essentially, when we click go and create this, little bugbear, only lowercase letters are needed. So it's my little data app. I realize I've changed the name, doesn't matter. So once we've got a name that it actually likes, because it's all lowercase, it'll go and start doing that. So what that's doing is provisioning compute. It's provisioning a little tiny, you can see over here, a little 2 CPU, 6 gig memory, 0.5 DBUs per hour box. So that tells me how much it's going to cost me. So it's going to spin up this little app box. Now, that's not the same as my serverless Spark cluster. So whenever someone uses it, I'm still going to have to spin up a cluster and actually serve that data out. This is just for the front end to be living at. So that's going to take a couple of minutes, but we'll do some other stuff while that's working. The source. So because I chose from a template that's taken an example Python app with the YAML file and with the requirements file, and it's deployed that to my workspace. So I need to build that manually if I was doing this myself. So it's automatically made that for me. Go and have a look at what that looks like. It's also made a couple of resources for me. And you can see I've got this. I've got a service principal. So it all automatically makes basically a service account within inside Databricks. There is now a user called app2ALYIL inside of my Databricks workspace, which is going to go and do that connection. So if it's going to go and query Unity Catalog, it's going to do it as that service principal. If it's going to go and query some data somewhere, my service principal needs access. I need to give it permissions inside Unity for that principal. That is my identity for this whole application. And automatically, as part of provisioning, it's given itself permission to that starter SQL warehouse. It can use that warehouse because I did that as part of my setup. There's then a bunch of instructions about how you do this locally. So if I wanted to open up in VS Code and do all my code locally and test my Streamlit locally, I can do that. I need to download the template file, sync it up. I need to do a load of stuff inside of my YAML file so it knows how to talk to Databricks. Because we'll have a look. The basic one is assuming it's already inside this app. If I want to do it outside of this app, inside of my VS Code, my local environment, I need to tell it which workspace I'm in, what my credentials are, how to connect to it. I need all of that information. I don't currently have that. But I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start just doing it in browser and actually seeing what we can achieve. So that's still going. Let's go and have a look at what the source code is. So you can see inside my user folder, it's already made a Databricks Apps folder. It's got the name of my app, my little data app. And it's deployed this folder, this kind of little basic Streamlit application. So we'll go backwards. There's nothing in requirements.txt. It doesn't need anything to actually run. If I was building my own thing and I needed it to pre-install a load of packages, I could put them in that text file, but I don't have any. That's nice and easy. My YAML file has a couple of things. So essentially any security config my app's going to need. Now in this case, that SQL warehouse is a particular pointer to a value inside of my app. My app already referred to that SQL warehouse. So rather than having to give it the ID, give it the actual unique identifier for my serverless SQL warehouse, it's just saying, well, just go and use that one. Go and use the variable that my app already knows about called SQL warehouse. Just use that, hence value from. And there's just some settings we can do. Now, again, if I was doing this locally, there's a whole bunch of settings I would need around my actual Databricks host path. What the name of that service principal is, the connection, the secret for that service principal. I need loads of details to get that to work locally. If I'm going to run it in Databricks Workspace, it's already got that information, so it just needs that. Nice and easy. So yeah, not too much in my YAML file. If I need to play around with a load of settings, that's where I do it. The bulk of my stuff is going to live in this app.py file. Again, so this is the templated one. I'm going to see what this is going to do. So it imports a load of libraries, sure. So you'll see anytime we're referring to ST, that is an alias for the Streamlit library. So Streamlit, just a Python library, lets us do a lot of things around, make a header, split my page into 2 columns, put a scatter chart over there, put a data table over there. They're all just basic Streamlit commands. So essentially we need to import that library and then pass it some data, and then it'll kind of work out the rest. It's very nice, out-of-the-box, Viz interactive stuff. That's the whole point of these Python frameworks. So what's it actually doing? Well, there's a bit of testing to make sure, does it actually know what the Databricks warehouse ID is? If it doesn't have that, then things aren't working properly. Probably if I've got it locally. I've got a defining my SQL query. So this is making a function just to say, look, if I need some data anywhere in my code, I can just call this SQL query, and that's going to do the authentication for me. So there's a bunch of stuff which is going off using Databricks.SQL. Again, you need to have that installed locally if you don't already have that installed. It's going to go get my host name, it's going to get my path, going to go and do an authentication with me. It's going to bring back, essentially, going to pass in a query, so some kind of query string, go run that bit of SQL. And it's going to return that as a pandas data frame. So if you're heavily entrenched in the world of Spark, you're like, oh, pandas? Why? Why don't you use PySpark? Because this isn't Spark. This is our one little tiny box of UI. The query that gets run and returns our results is going to run on Spark. We're running that on the serverless SQL warehouse endpoint. So that's going to go and run actually on a Spark engine. But the data that gets passed that I just need to visualize, that's just pandas. Pandas data frame doesn't need your big scale out architecture. There's no point. So everything is in pandas once you've got and brought back that thing. So if you want to do a bit of manipulation of that data frame using pandas, go nuts. What this is for. But realize everything that you're doing obviously has some impact in the user experience and how long things take. So I go get my data back. And then there's a bit in the example of just caching data. So it's going off and it's returning it. And it's running that particular query. So my SQL endpoint is going to receive a query that says, select star from my taxis data set, just give me the first 5,000 rows. And again, that's what I can get in. I can change so it can have play while it's actually happening. Going off and doing that, refreshing the data, and then the rest of this is our actual Streamlit commands. I appreciate that's fairly low down on the page. Let me just make that bigger. Ah, there we go. Okay, so st.header. That's making a header. I'm saying I want a header bit of HTML sat at the top of my page saying taxi fare distribution. The next section down should actually be split into 2 columns, and it should be 3 parts to 1 part. The first part, st.scatterchart, make a scatter chart. Here's the data. This is how it maps in. The second part, do a little subheader, and then do a text input, and then just write some information. So what we're going to see when we run this is a header at the top, and then some kind of scatter chart showing what my data looks like with my fair amount mapped against my trip distance. We can see by that y and x values. And then we're going to see 2 text inputs just on the right-hand side, saying from zip code and to zip code, allowing me to go and interact with it. And then a little bit of validation telling me what's happened. And then a data frame, essentially just a data table underneath there. So in terms of web dev, super easy. Just real easy bullet point. Just get that stuff done. Should make a nice little interactive app for me. So just having it skip through that code, it's not particularly complex how we actually do this stuff. Let's take a few steps back. So you can see, there we go, my app's now being deployed. You can see it's now running. If it's running, it is costing me money. So this UI app, even if I'm not running the query, my Spark pool, my serverless endpoint might be turned off currently, but my app is turned on, so I can click, visit my app. I've now got this URL for my app. That's then going to run things. That's then going to try and run my query. You can see this now running get data. And that's going to call my serverless endpoint to turn on, run that query for me, return the results back to my UI, and then it'll turn itself off. And there we go. We've got a UI straight out. So exactly as we were expecting based on reading through that Streamlit, I've got a title saying taxi fare distribution. I've got a little scatter chart. I've got a little subheader with a few bit user inputs, and I've got a data table. Super easy UI we can build. Again, in this case, it's kind of just showing a dashboard, and I could have built that anyway. But if I wanted to interact more and inject more into that SQL that I can't do with a straight parameter, if I needed to run a bit of PySpark, well, not PySpark, Python, to manipulate that data frame, and then have several steps of user interaction. Answer the first question based on your answer. Answer the second question. Now we're going to show you things we can build a user experience, and that's when this stuff really gets powerful. So yeah, okay, straightforward. I thought let's do a quick example of changing that around. Let's just quickly build a different dashboard over some of the data just to show you that you can take that template and start playing with it quite easily. So looking at billing stuff, been doing lots and lots with system tables recently, and you know, you've got this billing usage table. So I don't know, okay, across all my workspaces, where am I actually using things? Am I using it just as an interactive cluster? Am I using it for DLT? Am I using it for serverless compute? Where am I spending my money? And I appreciate there are dashboards that tell you this. Don't worry, I know it's a convoluted example. But the main thing is I wanted to just a bit of SQL that brought back that data. So from system.billing.usage, give me my total usage by the SKU name, group by it, order it, straightforward stuff. So I took that and I made a new app. If I go back to my app, you can see I've already got my little query builder app is currently running. I've got my code for it sitting there. I can go and have a look at it. Have a look at my code. Same thing. I just took this template and just edited it and had to play around. If I dive into my app.py, you'll see exactly the same stuff. It's doing the SQL connector. It's doing the config layout. I've injected my SQL query into the SQL. I've just changed the query that it's running. Don't go and run your existing samples taxi one. Run this little billing query instead. And then I've changed around what it's doing. So I've got a little header saying billing usage. I've still got 2 columns, but I've changed around the order of how it's splitting it. And I've said, actually, one of them should have a start date and an end date. I want to give it a period when it's looking at that data. Not to do that, I have to change my query slightly to bring in the usage date, but that's fine. So I've actually got 2 quick things, start date, end date, and then when the date's between these things. And finally, I didn't even write that. I started writing that, and then Databricks Assistant just said, oh, you're trying to filter between these two. So that whole line I didn't bother writing. It just suggested it, and I was like, yeah, that works. Hence why I'm not that fussed. Whether you code in VS Code or if you do it in the browser, if the browser's going to suggest the right code for me, I'm happy. And then I switched it around and did a bar chart rather than a scatter chart. Now, I had 1 or 2 funny things in here. So usage, for example, was just failing to render until I actually cast it as an int. So some of the Streamlit things are expecting certain data types to go into certain parts of the chart. Otherwise, it won't necessarily render. So you'll get into a play of going, try it, look at it, try it, look at it. But actually that, if I've edited this, my source code, and then I go back to my app and go, okay, redeploy my app. So essentially take the new version of the code that's in there, redeploy that code, stand it back up again, get it working. Takes a couple of seconds. That's it. So essentially the whole act of try my code, see if it works, try my code, see if it works. What does that look like? The iterative development of seeing what that does to the UI, it kind of just works anyway. So I was trying to have a play with this. I was building it in the browser, just changing the code, changing the bar chart over, changing what I was doing, changing the inputs, allowing it to write some of that Streamlit code for me. Yeah, fairly easy, nice experience. So basic UI, I've defaulted it to today. I've not made it a good user experience. If I put that back and say since the 1st of the month, you can see the usage I've been doing. If I put it back and go back a little further, what have I built in since September? There you go. I've now got my nice little dashboard that allows me to look at certain date ranges and tells me where I've been spending money. You can see I've mainly been spending it on all-purpose serverless compute, with a little bit of serverless in UK South as a different SKU to the main one I was looking for UK in West. See, I'm using other serverless SQL rather than serverless interactive. Yeah, you can go and explore that. I appreciate you can use the same thing for a dashboard, but the interactivity and the changing around of how people actually interact and building out a user journey, great. You can go and have a play with that stuff. And yeah, that's basically all I wanted to show you guys of the Databricks Apps experience. Actually fairly easy. Isn't really much to it, but actually you can build some fairly advanced things in there. You can actually just do a lot more than you can do with that static dashboard relationship. And the main question I've had people go, well, but how much does it cost? What does that mean that 2 VPC CPUs, 6 GB memory, 0.5 DBUs, what is that? Well, so 0.5 DBUs is the key thing. That is a Databricks unit. That is how much we are paying. If I dive over to the Azure pricing calculator, again, different depending on your region, different depending on AWS, whatever. To give you a quick example of what it's like in Azure. So I've got in here, I've selected West Europe, I've chosen interactive serverless compute. It has to be on premium tier to use serverless compute. So if I go 1 DBU for 730 hours. That's the pricing calculator default for turned on 24/7. So I'm not automating this at all. That app is just permanently turned on, sat there running. So 1 DBU is going to cost me 390 quid a month. So if I look at my computer, that's 0.5 DBUs. So that's going to cost me around 200 quid a month. To have that UI sat there, responsive, user experience, all of the pandas processing is doing, that costs 200 quid a month. So that's a decision, right? It's going, well, actually, okay, if I did it myself and I did it via a little Docker container and I just had it something super bare bones, could I make it cheaper than that? Yeah, probably. Is it that easy? No. So allowing people to just do a little bit of Streamlit and then hit a button and it works, 200 quid a month, you can actually have a suite of apps doing some really interesting things. So yeah, it's up to you in terms of price point. Does that work for you? In terms of dev experience and how it sits in and just being able to dive in, literally make a quick change. Let's just kind of add in another header somewhere. Let's go raw data. There we go. So that's done. That's changed. I've edited my code. I can hit deploy. Go and check the UI. Make sure that change has been made. Like, really quick little interactive. Let's just see if it works. Bear in mind, because this is a data-driven app, it is going and running that on the serverless SQL warehouse. But if you built it, you could build things without that. You could have it so it doesn't actually run get data first. You answer a load of questions, and then it goes and runs it, so you don't do that refresh. There we go. We've now got a little header saying raw data. Easy. That interactive development experience for me, yeah, I can build like that. I can build lots of little UIs and actually expose things to the world. If I was just built my brand new little large language model test app and I wanted people to give it a go, we built things like that for data labeling. We're trying to crowdsource data labeling, so I've got enough data to actually train a large model. Well, I can just a bit of gamification, make a little Streamlit app, give people access to it. They just label a load of stuff and earn some points and get some prizes. I get nicely labeled data. I can then go and train a model. Loads of stuff you can do with it. Yeah, cool. So again, docs down below for Databricks apps. They are out in preview now and only in certain regions, depending on if you have interactive serverless compute enabled. But yeah, no, definitely do say go and have a look at them. They are pretty darn cool if you like a little bit of UI development. Anyway, that is all I want to go through. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.